At the White House, two men are having a casual chat while on duty, and suddenly, the ground starts shaking and splitting. From underground, two supervillains known as the Mauler twins rise. Immediately, they are being shot at, but they are unfazed. Steve shoots one of the twins and shakily orders him to back off. The twin approaches him, and Steve shoots him once again, damaging the twin's eye this time. Before he could kill Steve, the Guardians of the Globe approach the Mauler twins and order civilians to be evacuated while they fight. The heroes help civilians evacuate while the Mauler twins broke through the walls to make it inside. One of the twins throws a woman, so Darkwing catches her. However, when they fall to the ground, the twin throws a tank, which forces him to use his strength to protect them both from being crushed. He was not able to get them both out, so he managed to get the woman out using a grappling hook. When it appeared he would be crushed, Omni-Man lifted the tank and helped him get out. Eventually, the Guardians overpowered the Mauler twins to restore order to the White House. Mark Grayson and his mother watched the news, in which the Mauler twins' attack on the White House was reported. Nolan makes it home and kisses his wife and mentions they would be going to Berlin, which makes Mark jealous. However, his father tells him that he could go himself once his powers kicked in. At school, his friend William was surprised that the Guardians had let the Mauler twins get that close to the president, but Mark points out that they had not made it inside the building and that Omni-Man was there too. Down the hall, Todd teases a girl who tells him not to harass her. This makes Mark angry, and he approaches Todd, who was way bigger than he was. He punched Mark, who was only saved by Amber, who kicked Todd in his genital area. Once Todd left, Mark was thanked, but left bruised. Later, Mark takes out the trash at his job, which is not an easy task for him. However, he picks up a second bag and throws it very far, discovering his powers had kicked in. It's about time. When Mark gets home, he told them that he had been getting his powers, but his father does not react until Debbie kicks him. Nolan congratulates him and tells him that they would train the next day. However, Mark could not sleep and remembers when his father told him the super strength and super speed of the Viltrumites. He leaves his room and, without thinking twice, jumps off the roof, and he finds he can fly now. He soars through the sky but nearly crashes into a plane, which sends him to the atmosphere, and he starts losing consciousness. When Mark awakes, he finds he is close to the ground and crashes into the street in front of his house. He wakes up at 6 a.m., very tired, and his father tells him they would train. Once they are in the sky, his father tells him he would get the hang of flying, having to focus at first. He tells him to land, but Mark had a hard time doing so and eventually crashed into the ground. Now that's got to hurt. The next day, Todd approaches Mark and puts him up against a locker, telling him he would hit him. Mark asked him to hit him as hard as he could and asked him to repeat his punches when they did not hurt him. Todd called him a freak and left. 3 criminals run from the police after robbing a place. Mark fights the big criminal and manages to hurt him. Omni-Man approached him and told him he looked ridiculous, also mentioning that he had skipped a few steps since he had caused a lot of destruction. Nolan then hugs his son and tells him that he will be, then tells him to follow him. They fly to a tailor where he tells Mark he will take him shopping for a suit. Art handed him a suit, but Mark was not sure about orange and yellow and wanted something more iconic, which Art understood. Debbie calls Mark, but finds he is not home. She hears a crash close to her house, and Mark exits a small crater created by the impact. Mark tells her he was practicing his landings and apologizes for the destruction he was causing in the backyard, but also said that he needed to be better. The next day, Nolan told Mark he seemed tired while they played catch while throwing a baseball around the world. But Nolan told him that it was the beginning of a long journey for both of them, and told him that it was okay to be scared, but needed to push through. Feeling inspired, Mark rushes to Art's shop and tells him he has his name ready. Later, he sits on top of a construction crane with his new suit and flies through his city. As he did this, however, he saw a laser attack from the distance. Kilcannon, the super criminal shooting it was being shot at by cops, but this did not bother him. Mark arrived at the scene and punched Kilcannon through several walls and through the street until the villain could not move. Standing victorious, Mark introduces himself as Invincible. Red Rush, the Immortal, Aqua Ross, Connie the War Woman, shape-shifting Martian Manhunter, and finally, the Darkwing are called into action in the headquarters. The heroes meet, but realize that none of the other Guardians made the alert. Red Rush senses the presence of Omni-Man and narrowly saves the Immortal from being decapitated using his super speed. Realizing his betrayal, the Guardians attack Omni-Man. Omni-Man takes a few punches from Red Rush before catching him by his wrist and horrifically crushing his skull while the other Guardians watch in shock and terror. Martian Man wraps himself around Omni-Man, and the remaining Guardians fight for their lives. Omni-Man continues to progressively overpower and further slaughter them, smashing Darkwing's head to pieces against the floor and driving his fist through Green Ghost's skull. He uses her body as a shield against Aquaros's attack and, after dealing with War Woman's heavy strike, kills him with her mace. An enraged Martian Man once again traps and subdues Omni-Man, briefly while the two remaining Guardians, the Immortal and War Woman, batter him, drawing whole puddles of blood. Eventually, Omni-Man rips Martian Man's head to pieces, punches a hole through the Immortal's stomach, and breaks War Woman's neck. The last Guardian to live, the Immortal stares at him, still conscious, and, weakly, yet decidedly asks him what drove him to commit the rampage. Omni-Man, without responding, decapitates him, and, heavily injured, collapses himself in exhaustion among the remains of his betrayed friends. The Guardians are dead, and Omni-Man lays next to them, injured as well. A door opens, and invisible agents look at the scene, followed by paramedics who are shocked and disgusted at the scene. They find Omni-Man is alive, and they move the bodies out from the room. In the morning, when Debbie opened the door, special agents of Global Guardians met her outside. At the clandestine GDA, Debbie is told that the comatose Omni-Man was in their secret hospital but couldn't revive the Guardians. They make it to Nolan's room, where they see Nolan lying without responding. Cecil introduces himself and tells them that they have no idea who did it. Debbie asks for materials and refuses to leave Nolan, mentioning that she had patched him up for 20 years. Donald gets a report that there was an undergoing attack with multiple casualties, and Mark leaves to go help out. When he makes it, he sees a big army attacking. He goes to where the tank is and tells them to stop, but he is blown back by an energy cannon, which kills several people. Invincible is intimidated and freezes until an old woman is shot at. He saves her and gets her out of the way, but not in time, as she is shot in his arms. He is shot at once again, but is saved by Adam Eve, who sets up a force field and defends him. Robot tells Eve that enemy tanks would line up to kill her, and she takes care of it, while Robot keeps telling everybody else what was happening. Duplicate and Rexplode continued attacking. Eve tells Invincible to take the old woman to a hospital since they had it covered. The team started getting overwhelmed and was about to get shot at once again until the aliens started dying and leaving. Invincible storms into a hospital, but is told to freeze by GDA agents. Paramedics received her, and the agents mentioned Invincible was cleared. At school, Mark walks down the hall, not caring if he bumped into anyone. William Clockwell finds he does not respond until Mark tells him that his father had been attacked and was really hurt. However, Mark ditches him when he sees Eve Wilkins, who he said he needed to talk to. Mark walked up to her. He thanked her for saving his butt. Eve realized who he was, and to talk about what had happened, the two left. On top of a building, they have a friendly chat and agree to meet after school to meet her team as well. Cecil tells Robot that they had done well but had not achieved a victory since 338 people had died. Cecil orders Demon Detective Damien Darkblood to reveal himself. Darkblood looks around and tells Cecil everything he knows. Cecil tells Darkblood to have at it and let him know if he needs help. Eve and Invincible fly through the city, and at one point, he worries that he had lost her, crashing into a billboard. They try flying again and fly through a bridge until a hole in the ground opens and Invincible meets Teen Team. When they get there, Rex makes out with Eve until he greets him, saying that they had won the fight without him, but Duplicate reveals that it had been because the aliens died. Later, Mark visits his father, saying that even if he did not like being in teams, he found Teen Team to be very cool, except for Rexplode. When Mark leaves, he walks into the room of the woman he had saved. The doctor tells him that her name was Maya, whose family now knew about her injuries. Mark tells William that he and Eve were just friends, but Mark looks across the cafeteria and locks eyes with Eve, who tells him to go talk to her. Amber approaches William and asks him if he was dating Eve, and William asked Amber if she wanted his number, and wrote it down for her. Team attacks the aliens who were fighting with superior technology than they were. Eve was able to drive many of them back, but had something thrown to her face which covered it. Mark deflected beams thrown at him by cannons and was taken out by a kind of glue which did not let him move. When the Flaxen's leader was about to kill Eve, Invincible let out a yell which blew everything at a certain radius away from him. He punched the Flaxen leader, who started aging once his bracelet broke, and saved Eve. The team realized they had to destroy the wristbands, and the aliens started dying soon after, which forced them to leave. Mark got to the hospital and found his father was awake now. Later, news broke that the Guardians had been missing for a week. At training, Mark tried attacking his father, who at first was able to dodge his punch. However, Mark finally learned to land one, but gets interrupted when Cecil visited them and told them that they had seen somebody from Mars approaching Earth. They decide to send Mark to intercept the man. Finally, some action for the young man alone. Invincible went to space and was attacked from behind. Alan the alien communicated via telepathy, and Invincible told him to leave and sent him towards a satellite, which was thrown back at him. Invincible took a moment to breathe, and he sent him crashing into the moon, which only made him laugh. Finally, he tells Invincible that he is an evaluation officer for the Coalition of Planets, making sure that there was somebody capable of defending them. Seems like it was big misunderstanding on his end, coming to the wrong planet. Nolan tells Cecil what he remembers from the night the Guardians were killed, but Cecil does not believe what he hears from Nolan's end. Something smells fishy. People are setting up memorials for the Guardians when Flaxen portals start opening again. The Flaxen army invades the city once again, and Robot tells Team that the Flaxens were now immune to the time stream and they should consider the city lost. He tells them that he will contact Cecil and request a nuclear response, but everybody disagrees. Invincible starts fighting the army, but is swiftly brought down and punched repeatedly in the face by the leader. Omni-Man arrives and starts defending the city, resisting all the attacks thrown at him and sending the enemies back where they had come from. However, when the leader looked up at Omni-Man once more, he punched him and went into the portal with him. Team was shocked and found out that Omni-Man was Invincible's father. Omni-Man told the Flaxens that they did not seem to understand that Earth was not theirs to conquer, taking them out and destroying their cities. When Nolan arrived home, he had grown a full beard. He was hugged by Mark and Debbie and told them he needed a shower. Just then, a news report came out, revealing that the Guardians were confirmed dead. People gather at the Guardians of the Globe's funeral, and Omni-Man gives a heart-touching, inspirational speech. But the actual burial of the heroes takes place somewhere else in secret due to many security reasons. Olga was upset that she could not see her late husband's body. When she threw herself at the ground, Debbie rushed to help her. Omni-Man spots Damien Darkblood, telling him that the ceremony was private. They share a few words, which is quite unpleasant due to their aggression towards each other. Cecil has decided to make Robot the leader of the new Guardians of the Globe and orders him to assemble a team as soon as possible. The Graysons make it back to their house. Nolan is rather cheerful, and Debbie notices it as well. He shouts at Mark for feeling down and tells him to get ready for practices soon. In his room, Mark looks at Amber's phone number and calls her. Mark tells her he thinks she is amazing and asks her if she wanted to study with him, which she agrees to. Things take a weird turn when Adam Eve makes it to Team's headquarters, where she sees Duplicate, who was acting suspiciously after a shower, having missed the funeral. Eve takes a look inside the shower and sees Rex Splode moaning and kissing Duplicate's twins, which makes her furious. So, the couple break up eventually. At the Pentagon, Robot and Invincible look at many heroes lined up, who will be selected to be the new Guardians of the Globe. Invincible doesn't try out since Omni-Man trains him separately. Eve faces a very strong man at the tryouts and defeats him quickly, showing a lot of anger. All the young heroes battle one-on-one to sit for the tryouts. In the end, Robot introduces the new Guardians: Black Samson, Shrinking Ray, Duplicate, Monster Girl, which makes Rex laugh since she was small. And that sparked a brutal kickdown on Rex by the Monster Girl. Invincible stopped her eventually, and she apologized for the battering on Rex. Hilarious. After that, Robot mentioned that Adam Eve would be the last member, telling them that he would be announcing it publicly later. Eve told him that she could not be on the same team as Rex and Kate and leaves. Invincible follows Eve and asks her what happened. Eve tells him how Rex cheated on her, and Invincible tries to comfort Eve as they fly along. As the new Guardians are informed of the future plans by Robot, Black Samson and Rex get into a heated argument, and soon after everybody leaves from above. Omni-Man observes, describing what he had seen as pathetic. In Mark's room, William cleans it up, telling him what needed to go. He tells his friend that he had brought homework for him and told him everything Amber liked after asking around at school. He greets Amber, who picks up the book William had brought. Mark nervously introduced himself as a comic fan. Amber asks which his favorite is, so Mark starts talking about them. Their date is interrupted by continuous calls, and then Cecil shows up. Cecil hands him a comm device and tells him Eve would be there as well. Cecil tells him that he needs to go to Mount Rushmore, which Mark does not know where to find. Amber walks back in and Mark makes up a lame excuse to leave. As Debbie walked in with snacks, Mark smiled nervously and left. Invincible and Adam Eve flew towards Mount Rushmore. As they did, Cecil tells them their target was Doc Seismic, who was doing things which made no sense. They believe that the gloves causes him to get concussion every time he uses them. Doc Seismic causes eruptions and causes Mount Rushmore to split. As Abraham Lincoln's face fell, Invincible caught it just in time before it hurt anybody, putting it back. After Mark barely managed to save a group, Doc Seismic tried to attack, but his bracelets were damaged by Eve. Due to his faulty bracelets, Doc Seismic nearly fell into lava, but was caught by Eve, who was in turn helped by Invincible. Doc Seismic fell anyway, and Invincible jumped after him, not able to grab him in time after a big explosions. Mark quickly leaves and tells Eve they would talk later. When Mark gets home, he runs into Nolan, who tells him to slow down. Mark explained that he had left Amber in his room while he dealt with a crisis. Mark walked back into his room, and Amber angrily told him she had been there for an hour and asking why he had asked her to hang out in the first place if he was leaving. Donald tells Cecil that the monster that Omni-Man had taken care of was impressive, since it was not an easy battle, and added that the beast might not be dead. Cecil told him to put it on ice. Eve takes down her pictures with Rex and cries as she does so. When she goes outside, she sees fireworks and makes some of her own while smiling. She meets Rex, who tells her he knew he had screwed up, but did not know why since he loved her. He asks for a do-over, but Eve wishes him luck with his new team and leaves. Eve goes to Mark's house, only to find him on his bed with Amber, kissing her. She tells herself that that was good for Mark and flies away. At the GDA, a guard moves through various cells containing many monsters. He hands one of the Mauler twins chicken pot pies. He hands the other one the same, but Robot makes the food compartment open all the way, allowing the twin to grab the guard and knock him out, using his hand to break out. The twins escape, and they start running and are chased by guards who leave after one of them receives a punch. As they move forward, a ladder falls. In the desert, the two twins exit and look towards the city, but are shot at by a powerful weapon. One uses his twin as a shield and takes the weapon down. He looks at his twin and tells him that he would miss him, but could always make another one, and leaves him to die. Debbie sits down while working at the kitchen when she gets cold. Damien the Demon is there for an investigation. They have a chat and it stops when Nolan shows up. Even he feels his demonic presence. Zayim steps out of a truck in the middle of the desert and the workers lift a rock and reveal a secret passage. Zayim moves everybody and goes down. When he makes it to the bottom, he walks to his master's tomb and brings him back to life, but shouts for help soon after. The workers realize he had resurrected Kahor and run off. As Kahor exits the secret passage, the big stone door falls on top of him. Omni-Man tells Invincible that he is messing up the desert since he was flying too low. When the latter turns around, he finds that he has created a big cloud of sand. They make up a race for Mount Everest, and obviously Omni-Man reached Mount Everest first and beats the young Mark easily. A hiker reached the summit and was surprised to see them both there, but going down soon after. After having a deep chat regarding their lives, they decide to race back home as well. This time, Mark takes a head start, but nevertheless, his father quickly passed him. Darkblood pours himself a drink and receives Nolan, telling him that he had wondered if he would come. Nolan threatens him not to bother any of his family ever again, or he will face the consequences. Omni-Man leaves after, with a dramatic exit. The Mauler twin opens a warehouse and gets to work by setting up a lab. He drills his arm until he gets blood and finds a cell, which starts to duplicate. He puts it into a big pod, which closes. He greets his brother and tells him that he must be hungry, giving it food. Robot is interrupted from watching the Mauler twin work by Rex, who welcomes him to the new Guardian's new digs. Black Samson and Rex get into an argument again, and Cecil walks in and tells them not to be surprised, since it was their job. Robot has a chat with Monster Girl, and advice a stubborn Rex as well. Seems like Robot is up to something fishy on his own, right? Nolan returns home and has an argument with Debbie, his wife. Seems like the wife is being a typical wifey. Suddenly, Nolan swiftly turns and grabs Cecil by the neck, throwing him against a bookshelf, but lets him go. Cecil apologizes, and Nolan tells him that he had almost killed him, being jumpy for reasons Cecil would understand. Amber and Mark head back to Amber's home. She tells him to plan the date next time, which he likes. The two lean in for a kiss, and Mark flies into the sky happily and heads back home. Coming home, he finds Cecil and his parents having a wild discussion about a NASA expedition to Mars. As expected, Mark volunteers, and Cecil explains him the mission. Nolan disagrees, but Debbie wants Mark to take on the responsibility. So eventually, Mark does what his mom tells him to do. At school, Mark tells Eve that he did not want to lie to Amber, and they have a friendly chat regarding their lives and work. Eve gives him good advice, though. Amber watches the news where the Mars mission is being broadcast and hears the doorbell ring. She sees Mark with a big, expensive ball they had seen on their date. She thanks him for it and invites him in, but he told her that he would be gone for 2 weeks in order to volunteer, asking her not to lose interest in him while he was gone. They kiss and he flies along with the Mars shuttle. In space, Cecil told Invincible that he almost did not make it, but needed him to stay out of sight unless something went wrong, and also needed him on the mission due to the Martians. Nolan and Debbie watch the news, and the couple discuss their feelings toward each other. Since Mark has left, Nolan tells his worries with GDA since they suspect him for the demise of the Guardians, and Debbie feels sorry for this. Invincible gets comfortable next to the spacecraft, but does not like it when he bites into his sandwich, which is completely hardened. Nolan and Debbie walk through Rome until they get to L'Osteria Donato, a fancy restaurant which Nolan had made reservations to, which Debbie mentions is new. Aboard the spacecraft, Invincible wakes up and sees Mars. They finally land, and he gets off before they do. The astronauts tell Houston they arrived, and one of them spots Invincible, but none of the others do, so he tells them to forget it and they get to work while Mark looks at pictures of Amber only to find out the astronauts had been taken away. While Nolan and Debbie are having a romantic time at Rome, enjoying food at their favorite restaurant, a dragon shows up, but Nolan does not move, simply continues to talk with Debbie. She tells him she does and begs him to do something about the dragon, to which he simply responds that he was on vacation, so Cecil should handle it. Back at the Graysons, an orchid freezes as Damien Darkblood shows up and looks around. He takes notes and sees Cecil is there as well with cops, who point guns at the demon. Cecil tells Darkblood that Nolan had warned them about him. Invincible remembers that Martians live underground. He lifts up a big rock and is attacked by many sequids. He throws them away and walks through the hidden hallway. There he finds a crystal-like object which turns out to be a Martian. He turns out to be surrounded and is ordered not to move. Invincible tells them that he was not there to hurt anyone. Another sequid jumps at him, which he quickly pull off and throws away. Invincible tells the Martians that they should keep their dogs on a leash, but they are surprised that he was unaffected by the sequid, though Mark sarcastically tells him that he was very affected by them. Mark is brought to the Emperor of Mars, where he is welcomed. He awkwardly greets the Martian and tells him that he was sent to protect fellow Earthmen on a mission to Mars and needed them to go back alive. The Martian tells him that the sequids were the very reason why the humans were captured, since they were a world-destroying race who left a trail of destruction across the universe before crashing into Mars. Then, out of the blue, Invincible and the astronauts are then seen fleeing from the Martians. Back to their spacecraft, Invincible gets the astronauts back into the spacecraft, and they hurry up, lift off while Invincible faces off with the Martians. Invincible attempts to fight the Martians, but was outnumbered, so he lifts the spacecraft off of the Mars's surface, helping the astronauts escape. With the astronauts safe, Invincible lands back on Mars and asks the Martians if he could take a rock, much to their apparent confusion. However, in the spacecraft, a Martian disguised as one of the astronauts noticed the flag symbol on his suit was upside down and quickly fixed it. On Mars's surface, and after Invincible had left, the Martians turned to face the astronaut who had been replaced and saw he had been taken over by sequids. The possessed astronaut unleashes a wave of sequids on the Martians as their invasion of Mars begins. On Earth, news told the success the astronauts had in Mars. Mark arrives home, hearing noises in his house. But when opening the door, he sees his parents awkwardly staring at him. Debbie asks him how Mars had been, but Mark tells them that less eventful than whatever had been going on in the house while he was gone. Mark greets Amber at school. She kisses him and asks him how it was, to which he responds that it was boring and a few other details. Amber pointed out that his story was not very specific, but Mark tells her that he got her a rock, which she does not find very impressive. He tells her not to show it to any geologists, and she thanks him for the rock. At the Pentagon, Cecil and the officers take Darkblood through a hallway. Cecil told him that when they had searched his office, they had found dried blood. Donald starts the ritual which surprises Darkblood, saying he never thought Cecil would protect Omni-Man. An angered Darkblood claims that there is a worse place waiting for Cecil than hell. However, Cecil remains unfazed as Darkblood is grabbed by chains and taken back to hell. Debbie cleans up Olga's house, finding it to be a mess. She looks at a picture of her and Joseph and keeps going. She shows people the house, but keeps looking at the picture. Two men are smoking, but they are confronted by Titan, who turns himself to stone and enters the secret operation they were covering. He defeats everybody and tells the man in charge that if Mr. Liu was on their turf again, he would be less gentle the next time, but snaps his neck and tells another kid the message was for him. People watched a video where Invincible fought a man who surrendered but would not listen and hit him once again. At school, Mark greeted Amber, but she ignores him since he was 20 minutes late. Mark explains that he had gotten a cake for her and stays behind, but she drags him with her. At a fire, Titan makes it even worse by throwing gasoline inside. He is confronted by a man, so he gives him some money and tells him where he could go until he got a new place. Invincible fought another villain and thanked the crowd who celebrated. Later, his boss, Mr. Sayer, yells at him for being late once again, so Mark quits. Titan accepts money from a man and spares his life after seeing he had a daughter. Invincible and Omni-Man fought a villain, who they wanted to talk. Omni-Man taught him how to scare villains and dropped him, catching him later. Mark rushes to school and is told that if he wanted to go to college, they needed to discuss his attendance issues. Titan breaks into a lab where he gets a chip, telling the guards that if they wanted to live, they should not shoot at him. Later, Invincible cancels a date with Amber via text since he was fighting a villain. Titan reaches his boss, Machine Head, and handed him the chip which he put in his head. He tells him he is done working for him, but his boss refuses, telling him that he only served to break heads and would work for him until he said so. Titan angrily breaks the boss's desk, which the latter mentions proved his point. Mark attempts to stop an asteroid heading for Earth and manages to do so successfully, throwing it back into space. After a huge effort, Omni-Man tells him that the asteroid was small, which shocked his son. Mark gets a text from Amber and is allowed to leave. Mark gets to Amber's home and apologizes for getting there late. He tells her that the food was great, but she tells him that dinner had been 2 hours before and asks him if she was important to him since he was bad at showing up. Mark apologizes and says things are not easy, but she tells him that she would not go down that road again. He is able to get one last chance and leaves. As he walks down the street, he is called by his father, who tells him the elephant was robbing a store and reluctantly goes to help. Titan enters his apartment and hands his daughter a dessert. His wife asks him if he was out and is disappointed to see he still worked for his boss. From their terrace, his daughter spots Invincible carrying the elephant. He tells her that people says Invincible is good and tries to be a good person himself. Debbie gets cold in her closet and finds Darkblood's notebook, which she reads in the bathroom, confirming her lingering suspicions. Eve is berated by her parents since the only reason they had allowed her to become a superhero was because Rex was there to protect her, but she tells them she could take care of herself and that team was gone. Her father tells her that she could not be a superhero alone, but she leaves. Invincible races through the sky and goes to a rooftop where he meets Titan. Invincible remembers him and calls him a criminal, but Titan tells him that he does not even know the meaning of the word. He tells him he only needed a little money and asked him to help him take down his boss, who ran the city. Invincible tells him he only does big picture things, but is convinced to see what happens in the real world. Titan shows Invincible who Machine Head is and explains what he does. Titan tells him that if he helps him take Machine Head down, he would help real people. When Invincible asks why he had accepted money in the first place, he tells him that it had not been for him. At dinner, Mark tells his parents that he can take down Machine Head, but Debbie was not listening. After Mark's explanation, Nolan tells him that he would be making a huge mistake because he was being used and that problem was beneath him. Debbie tells Mark that sometimes people are not who they appear to be and adds that helping someone was never beneath him. The new Guardians of the Globe celebrate a victory against the Lizard League. They all celebrate with beers except for Robot and Black Samson, who emits a high frequency which shatters their bottles. He tells them that people were in the hospital because they had not fought as a team. They go through the fight, and Black Samson lectures them on what they could have done to save lives, but Rex was unhappy and told him they had done their best and won. At the Mauler twins' lab, the clone is ready and is taken out of the pod. They both lay down and their heads are shocked. When the shock ends, the newly made twin welcomes the twin who made him into the world, calling him the clone. As they argue, Robot says he would never understand why they did that. The twins attack him, but stop when he stood on top of the replication chamber. Robot explains that he needs their expertise in tissue regrowth and DNA replication, telling them they would be rewarded. Debbie calls Nolan, asking him to get food from Rome and wine from Provence. When Nolan leaves, she checks the house and finds the air vent has been moved. She also finds a bag, but hides it as Nolan comes back. Titan and Invincible break into Machine Head's building, but when Invincible confronts him, he does not move. Machine Head reveals he knew they would come thanks to the new chip Titan had gotten. Isotope also reveals himself, which surprises Invincible. Machine Head accepts he is out of his league, but mentions it is a good thing he had money, so he could afford many supervillains, which Isotope teleported into the room. Eve meets Amber at Beckwell Community Center, where the latter shows her around. When Eve asks if Mark was there, she is told that he had 15 minutes to be there, or he would be dumped. Eve is handed an apron and is put on chopping duty. Invincible and Titan fight the supervillains, but are overwhelmed as Omni-Man watches from a distance. Invincible is electrocuted while Titan is burned. After a sudden burst of energy, Invincible tells them they would die and swiftly kills two before having his head shoved into the ground by Battle Beast. He tries getting up. He is thrown once again. Machine Head celebrates, but mentions he was getting a signal as the Guardians of the Globe show up. They mention that Cecil had gotten an anonymous call and would take it from there. Machine Head tells his supervillains to kill the Guardians, and they swiftly defeat them. Battle Beast mentions he believed Earth had worthy opponents and told Invincible that killing him would be an act of mercy. Black Samson tries to shoot at him but fails, and Invincible is struck in his stomach and stops responding. Black Samson gets up and runs toward Battle Beast, who rips his hand from his wrist and throws him, cracking his head. Monster Girl tries to defeat Battle Beast as well, but is also swiftly defeated. Robot shoots at him, and while the Guardians looked at their fallen friends, they told the supervillains that they had messed up. Working together, they share an intense encounter with the villains and defeat them except for Battle Beast, who says there was no honor in killing insects, and leaves. Robot hold Monster Girl after seeing she was badly injured. Machine Head describes the events as strange and asks Isotope to get him out of there, but finds he does not respond and is hit by Rex. Mark awakens, and Titan tells him that he did not mean for things to turn out the way they did before leaving. Amber and Eve pour soup for everybody, who Amber knows. Eve tells her that being so involved was impressive, but Amber says that she had thought Mark would be there with her. GDA doctors look at Mark and mention he was losing too much blood. Cecil arrives at the scene and is horrified by what he sees. He tells the doctors to save him since they needed Invincible, but also tells them to get a blood sample, just in case. Machine Head is dragged away, but before he leaves the room, Cecil opens his head and takes the stolen chip. Mark calls for his father and shuts his eyes while the doctors mention they were losing him. Eve receives a phone call telling her about Mark, so she tells Amber she needed to leave. She tells Amber that Mark loved her and would be there if he could before leaving. Robot comforts Monster Girl and tells her he would fix her. Nolan arrives home as Debbie takes a phone call. Isotope teletransports himself into Machine Head's office and congratulates his real boss, Titan, on what he had done. Titan tells him that he had told Invincible the truth. He would make the city better and greeted his family. Donald goes to the lab, where he is told that Viltrumite cells just would not die. 3 girls are approached by a drunk boy who tells them he is Doug Cheston, son of the owner of Cheston Pharmaceutical and half the university. He invites them to party with him, but they refuse. As soon as they leave, the boy is attacked from behind. When Doug awakens, D.A. Sinclair tells him that he will be turned into a brave explorer. He looks at his arm, which is now half human and half robot, which surprises him. Since he did not stay quiet, D.A. Sinclair cut his throat and removed his vocal cords. Meanwhile, Invincible, Monster Girl, and Black Samson are rushed into the emergency unit. Monster Girl was drowning in her own blood and was intubated, but as they took care of her, she turned into the monster. Robot walks in and tells them only he can save them since he has studied her deeply. Black Samson was fibrillating, but they did not manage to wake him. Much to their surprise, he suddenly started emitting light waves which caused energy surges, but also gave him a heartbeat. Invincible has a hole all the way through him, so doctors work on him as Debbie and Nolan make it to the emergency unit and watch their son in horror. Mark finally woke and saw his parents. Nolan explains his condition and Mark gets worried about Amber. Fortunately, Eve has saved the day and seems like all is well for now. Nolan has a chat with Cecil regarding dark blood and Cecil only tells him what he needs to know. In Amber's room, Mark and Amber are trying to reconnect with each other. She feels guilty that she had basically dumped that night. He asks her if they could start over once again, which she accepts by faking a phone call with him. At school, William tells Mark that he would be going for a tour of Upstate University that day with a boy he liked named Rick. Mark asks if he can go and bring Amber, saying he needed it. In Mark's room, Eve pays him a visit. He thanks her for talking to Amber when he got hurt and hugs her. He tells her he would be visiting Upstate University and invites her, but she mentions that she would not be going to college since she wanted to help people by actually helping them. Debbie calls Mark, telling him that William and Amber were there, and Eve leaves. They all get into William's car and leave in a jiffy. Amber asks William to tell her about Rick, who William is excited for her to meet. He tells her he is incredible and does not stop talking about him, which annoys Mark. Nolan asks Debbie if she would be going out and she tells him that she needed to pick up some dry cleaning and something for dinner. When she is gone, Nolan opens up his bag and finds his suit is gone. At Upstate University, they greet Rick, who helps them with their bags. They look at Rick and William mentions it would be a great weekend. Mark mentions that the place was great and Rick tells them he had arranged for them to see what a biology class looked like. On a kiosk, a missing poster looking for Doug Cheston is posted. Eve is packed, and she is trying to leave the house against the great protests of her father. She bids farewell to both her parents and takes her leave into the thick jungle where she creates a nice and comfy treehouse overlooking the horizon. At the class, a professor gives a biology class, but D.A. Sinclair does not agree with what he has to say and tells him that all these teachings are below average. Amber tells him he was being a jerk, and D.A. Sinclair walks up to them and tells Rick that he did not belong in a school of idiots, He calls Rick impressive and is asked to leave by the professor. Amber asks Mark if he is okay, and he says that he is happy. Rick tells them that they could wander around the campus, and they start looking around. After a while, Mark tells Amber that he likes it there and wanted to go to the school with her. But she tells him that if he wanted that, he would need better grades, and they share a passionate kiss. All of a sudden, there was an explosion, and from it came a cyborg who started attacking people while holding his head. When the cyborg grabs Rick, William throws soda cans at it, so it attacks him instead. The cyborg is choking William and is about to kill him. Amber calls Mark, who disappears and returns as invincible, stopping the cyborg's fatal blow. Since William was dropped, he looks up at Invincible and recognizes Mark, who simply told him to run. After that, Invincible and the cyborg started fighting for real. Invincible was choking until he managed to lift up the cyborg's mask, which angers the creature, and it throws him away. The creature looks at himself and screams in horror, killing himself. Amber gets angry at Mark for leaving them there and running off. She storms off while William is still in shock, learning about the true identity of Mark. D.A. Sinclair is furious and mentions that would be the last time that he would leave anybody's frontal lobe intact while checking out Rick. Eve looks at her phone and flies away, saying that she needed to make a world she wanted to live in. At the GDA, a broken-down robot clone walks into a room, telling doctors that he had sent a clone to the Arctic and had gotten a cerulean cosmos, which he believed would add 60% chance to her survival. He walks up to Monster Girl, and Samson, from the other room, saw he really cared for her. Robot tells him it was good to see him awake. Debbie visits Art Rosenbaum, who tells her the news was not good. They look at Nolan's suit and find traces of War Woman's armor, parts of Aquarus, slashes from Darkwing, and friction burns from Red Rush. However, Art explains that the oldest trace of blood on the suit was on Nolan's wrist, meaning he had struck first. Meanwhile, from the outside, an angry Nolan looks on. Amber takes Rick's room as she doesn't want to bunk with Mark, and Rick leaves to get everyone some beer. When he leaves, William excitedly repeats that Mark is invincible, but does not like that he was never told. Eve helps stop many natural disasters, and also helps farmers have their crops grow. Robot tells the Molar twins that their work was good, since they were able to grow cells quickly. Robot tells them that they would need to finish their work first, and does not negotiate. The twins, however, do not trust him. William keeps asking Mark about being invincible, but the latter mentions he does not even want to be a superhero, and was not sure Amber would forgive him this time. When asked to, Mark reluctantly takes William flying and does not let him try his suit on. As Amber walks down the hall, a boy named Kyle invites her to a frat party. Rick calls William and asks him if they wanted pizza, which he agrees to. During the call, Rick is attacked and the call ends. Mark is sad Amber had gone to a party without him, but is told what happened to Rick by his friend. Mark tells him that he really does not want his help since he always makes things worse. He tells him that he needs to go after Amber first and leaves. Black Samson tells Robot that he feels even better than when he lost his powers. Robot tells him to go back to HQ while he remained there with Monster Girl recovered. When Samson left, Robot put his hand on her face and she suddenly awoke. She asks if they had won, and he says that they had thanks to her, and he had never left while she recovered. Nolan angrily approaches Art from behind, but shows him a few beers he had bought. William finds Rick's phone shattered and calls for him, following a trail of blood and his shoe to a sewer drain. Amber is approached by Kyle, who greets her at the party. Meanwhile, Mark also makes it to the party. Nolan and Art share laughs while reminiscing about the past. However, he asks Art why he is a little nervous. Art tells him he is tired, and Nolan says he understands since he knew how things could change from one day to another, and hands Art another beer. At the party, Mark sees Amber talking to Kyle, who is holding her shoulder. While they talked, Amber tells him he is a little nerdy for a frat guy, and he tells her that his girlfriend says the same thing, which surprises her. He asks Amber if she was seeing anybody, and she tells him that not anymore. Mark gets calls from William and picks up reluctantly, only to see his friend being dragged away by a monster. William is confronted by Sinclair, and he sees the horrors firsthand and cannot believe his eyes. Mark goes underground to the sewer and looks around for William. He is attacked by Sinclair's cyborgs and taken underwater while being punched. He finds Sinclair's lab while William is tied up. Invincible is punched by many of the monsters while Sinclair argued that he was fixing humanity's weaknesses. Mark takes one of the cyborgs' helmet off and finds out it was Rick, who is living without emotions. Invincible is thrown around while William tries talking to Rick, remembering how they had had sex before. Sinclair starts cutting William's arm, which makes Rick recognize William and remove part of his helmet, so he can help Invincible. Sinclair tries escaping, but William chases him and punches him in the face repeatedly. When he gets up, Mark punches him again, fracturing his jaw. Invincible apologizes to Cecil for having punched Sinclair like that, but he understands and tells him he would lock Sinclair up while doing his best for the humans who had been experimented on. Mark and William make it back to their room where William starts sobbing. Mark opens the door to Amber's room but closes it once again. Nolan makes it home where Debbie is drinking wine. She asks him why he had killed the Guardians, but he denies it. She throws her bottle of wine at him when he tells her she is drunk, and she tells him to fuck himself. He breaks the bottle of wine and punches a hole through the wall. The ride back from Upstate University is silent, as Amber does not want to listen to Mark. Amber says goodbye to William and tells Mark that she did not want to put up with his bullshit anymore. As Mark was about to tell Amber he was invincible, she shut the door, but Mark flies up to her bedroom as Invincible and explains why he was always late. However, Amber already knew, and she tells him that he lied to her and does not trust her, so she tells him to leave. Meanwhile, back in the jungle, Eve makes herself coffee at her treehouse and browses her phone while looking at the view. Debbie wakes up and goes downstairs where she sees Nolan. She asks him why he murdered the Guardians, and in reply, he asks her to trust him. But she says it is impossible since the Guardians were their friends. Nolan says he did not have a choice, so she tells him to get out of her house. He storms out and tells her they will talk later. Debbie calls Mark, but he does not pick up. Soon she is surrounded, and Donald tells her to go with him. Monster Girl is welcomed back by the Guardians, who hug her. Rex tells them all they should party, handing her a milk carton, which has beer in it. Monster Girl is amazed, since Black Samson has recovered his powers. Robot tells her he is glad she had recovered, and that he would never let her die, and goes into a technical issue surprising everyone. The Mauler twins get a delivery by a hologram. When the truck opens up, Robot walks out and tells them to step back. He unveils the real Robot and asks to see their work, which he finds satisfactory except for a few details. He tells them to implement some fixes so they could discuss their payment, but the Mauler twins want to talk about the payment first. Mark and William sit in the latter's car, eating fast food. William wonders if Rick will ever go back to normal, and Mark tells him Cecil will get him back. They talk furthermore, but Mark steps out since he needs some time alone. Debbie makes it to the GDA where she asks Cecil why he had kept Nolan's secret from her. Cecil tells her that he could not risk Nolan finding out anything just yet. He says that there might be only one person who could fight Omni-Man. He asks her where Mark is, but she tells him it will not happen. Omni-Man practices how to tell Mark he had killed the Guardians, saying it was his responsibility, confident Mark would understand. And he leaves the Himalayas after the practices. The Mauler twins work on Robot. He leaves his pod and tells the Mauler twins to hurry with him since air was toxic to him. They put a mask on him and placed him on a bed so that the copy of his mind would start on the new body. With great difficulty, they complete the process. Rudy gets up and does not recognize if he was the clone or the original. Rudy tells the original he was sorry that it had not been him, but is told not to worry and be happy, changing the world. The clone cries and lets the original die. When asked for the payment, Rudy commands them to return to prison, which starts up the brawl. The Mauler twins take care of the normally sized robots until a bigger one emerges and pounds them at every corner. Nolan looks for Mark in his house, but finds nobody except a GDA agent, who he grabs and slams into the ground. He is shot at by many of the agents, who he kills swiftly. He finds the house the GDA had bought in front of them, which infuriates him, but Donald tells him it was for his family's protection. Nolan tells him he had always been pathetic and crushes his spine. Donald tells Cecil that it had been an honor and blows the house up. Mark runs into Eve and she realizes that she would be helping him today. Weird connection between the two of them from the beginning, right? The Mauler twins are mad at Robot since he had double-crossed them. They fought the giant robot as much as possible, and suddenly he goes off after getting a call from Cecil. William drives home when he is approached by an angered Omni-Man. William is dead scared to face him, and Omni-Man leaves after learning Mark is with Eve. William was nearly crushed to a blood pudding. Cecil tells the Guardians to be quiet and sit tight until they are called. The team is furious, and to make matters worse, the robot is not responding, and suddenly the new robot appears to them. He presents himself as Rudolph Connors, saying Robot was simply a drone he controlled remotely. Kate asks how they could know he was telling the truth, and Robot says they could ask him anything. The GDA found that Mark was flying with Eve, but also saw that Omni-Man was 6 minutes away from Mark's location, which worries Cecil. He says they need to buy some time. Mark tells Eve what happened with Amber, which she empathizes with. He says he does not know who he has to be. Nolan flies, but is struck down by an enormous beam of light coming from a satellite in space, which manages to bring him down in many forests, fields, and animals around him, savaging square kilometers of land and leaving a giant crater in the ground. However, Nolan soon gets up once again, resisting the beam's energy and destroying the satellite. Cecil comments that $400 billion had just been used for a nosebleed. Omni-Man went back to going after Mark and Eve, while Cecil told them he would use his teleporter. Rudy tells the Guardians everything that had happened, but Rex still wants to know why he had picked his body. Monster Girl realizes that he had done it for her. Rudy explains that Monster Girl was slowly getting younger, and he was trapped in a mechanical tomb, while she was stuck as well. Monster Girl goes through everything Robot had done and says that she needs time to process it. Black Samson calls the Guardians and tells them he knew why they were on high alert. They see a video of Omni-Man destroying the satellite. Mark and Eve hear the explosion, and Eve tells him that they should call Cecil. He tells her that it was not their problem anymore. Eve tells him that she did not ignore the world when it needed her. Nolan is shot at by Cecil. He tries to grab him, but disappears just before Nolan grabs him. Nolan tells him to keep out of it, but Cecil says that he could not do that, asking why he had killed the Guardians. He tells him that Debbie deserved an answer and tells Nolan that he had fooled her and all of them for 20 years. He asks Nolan if Mark knows, which worries him, but Nolan realizes Cecil was just wasting his time. When Cecil leaves, Nolan is attacked by Sinclair's cyborgs, which put up a fight with him as he tries to get them off. He fights the monsters and rips them apart. Cecil, D.A. Sinclair, and Debbie watch Nolan's fight in horror as he starts ripping the bodies apart. Agents also tell Cecil that Eve and Mark were moving towards Nolan's location, which worries Cecil. The Mauler twins comment that Robot was a dick as they try to bring the immortal back to life. Nolan faces another monster on his way to Mark, which he tells Cecil he had defeated already. 2 news helicopters went to Omni-Man's fight. The Guardians say they should help, but Cecil tells them to stay where they are and they would be their last hope against Omni-Man. Nolan fights the monster, while Debbie tells Cecil to call Eve's phone since she was with Mark again. In the distance, Mark saw Nolan being crushed by the creature and raced forward in order to help him. As Nolan was about to be eaten, Mark punches the creature and sends it flying. Eve gets called by Debbie and asks what was happening. Nolan awoke and Mark happily told him it was about time they teamed up together. When the creature rose, Cecil tells Eve not to help them and get to Guardians HQ. The Mauler twins finish working on the Immortal, who does not immediately wake. He is hit many times and is suddenly being brought to life and remembering everything that had happened. He wakes up, furious, and is controlled by a collar. However, Immortal rips the collar off and asks where Omni-Man is. They do not know, and he flies off. Mark asks why the monster was tougher now that they were fighting it, and Omni-Man tells him that there were many things he did not know since Cecil had sent it after him. Mark tells him that maybe he could explain after they killed the monster. Cecil is told that a new object was approaching Omni-Man's location, turning out to be the Immortal, who catches up to him and immediately starts pummeling him in blind fury. The surprised Omni-Man quickly retaliates, catching one of his punches and callously remarking he should have stayed dead before brutally fending him off. However, Nolan worries over Mark, who is under the beast's control. Mark grabs a cable and electrocutes the beast as Nolan and Immortal keep fighting. Nolan catches one of his punches and drives his fist through his stomach again, punching all the way through him and shocking the entire world, which was watching thanks to the news helicopters. However, even once again fatally injured, Immortal sticks his thumbs into Omni-Man's eyes in an attempt to blind him. In agony, Nolan eventually manages to kill the hero once more, tirefully and horrifically, bisecting him and dropping his halved body as Mark watches. Immortal's bisected corpse drops to the ground. Mark stares at Immortal's remains and understands that it was his father who had killed the Guardians of the Globe. Nolan attempts to de-escalate the situation and explain, only for Mark to attack him, believing Nolan to be controlled by some form of influence. Nolan then takes the time to explain the truth about him and Viltrum to Mark. Nolan hadn't lied about Viltrum's existence, but had lied to Mark about its true nature. Despite Nolan's reassurance that it's for the greater good, Mark needs to take this information better. Mark takes a firm stance against Nolan and vows to defend Earth from him and the rest of the Viltrumites. Nolan attempts one more time to talk his son down, but when it becomes clear that Mark will not change his mind, Nolan relents, and the two engage. A brawl breaks out between them, with Nolan having the clear advantage from the get-go. All the while this is occurring, Cecil tracks the fight, which is broadcast in full view of himself, Debbie, and the new Guardians. As the fight is taken to the sky, Cecil sends out jets in the hopes of distracting Nolan and enabling priceless seconds for Mark to gain the upper hand. Nolan takes his attention off Mark and retaliates, destroying one jet. Mark rushes to the pilot's aid, saving him from a fall to his death. The pilot expresses gratitude to Mark, only for Nolan to effortlessly crush the pilot's skull to illustrate how meaningless Mark's efforts are. Nolan continues to ridicule Mark's love of human life before punching him with such force that he causes an earthquake-level shockwave upon landing in the city streets. The results of the catastrophe traumatize Mark, who quickly rushes to the aid of the people in the building he had crashed through. Standing amidst the rubble, Mark holds the severed arm of a mother whom he had attempted to save from the building. Nolan shows up, and the two argue once more. Debbie overhears this and begins to break down. Mark becomes enraged and attacks, accusing his father of lying, landing several blows, and catching Nolan off guard. Nolan quickly recovers, and once again forced Mark to witness complete and total carnage by holding him in front of a moving train and allowing it to hit the both of them. The train is ripped in half, and the people inside are continually minced until Nolan stomps, sending the remaining cars careening in random directions. Mark attempts to strike his father again, but Nolan does not buckle a second time. Meanwhile, seeing an opening, Samson orders the Guardians to head into the city and aid civilians, while Mark and Nolan are in the air. Rudy hesitates to disobey Cecil's orders, but Monster Girl reassures him that he's not just a robot anymore, pushing him to follow the others. Nolan forces Mark underwater, nearly drowning the boy. Just as Mark begins losing consciousness, Nolan throws him into the side of a mountain before landing and dealing a punch so powerful that it causes an avalanche, destroying a small village nearby. However, when Nolan reels back to give the killing blow, he hesitates. As he stares at Mark's broken body, he has a flashback. In a scene from Mark's childhood, Nolan and Debbie watch a young Mark play baseball. Debbie from the bleachers and Nolan standing off to the side. Nolan is, at first, resistant, but seeing the excitement and joy in Mark's eyes as he manages to hit the baseball triggers Nolan's fatherly instincts. He joins Debbie in excitedly cheering their son on as he rushes to home base. Mark succeeds in getting a home run and sprints to his parents. Nolan picks the boy up and proudly congratulates him. Back in the present day, Nolan finds himself unable to kill his son despite everything he had said prior. Nolan is washed over with painful emotions before immediately flying off, leaving Earth entirely. He begins crying as he exits the atmosphere, leaving a single tear floating in space. Mark remains on the mountain, where Cecil sends a chopper to rescue him. During his rescue, it's revealed that William, Art, and Amber have all witnessed the events on the news and are devastated at the potential loss of their friend. The news reports go on to mention the extreme loss of life, only mitigated by the help of the Guardians and Adam Eve. Elsewhere, the Mahler twins burn down their makeshift lab but are then apprehended by GDA agents. They briefly attempt to fight back. However, more GDA units appear, and realizing they're outnumbered, the two of them surrender. Mark eventually regains consciousness but is still severely injured. Mark is still so heartbroken by what happened that he can only cry. Debbie understands and leaves the room to give him space. Cecil approaches, offering her and Mark a safety net by forging Nolan's death. The Guardians eventually return to their headquarters, exhausted from their rescue efforts. Rex eyes the last bloodstain from the original Guardian's murder. He grabs a rag and begins to clean it, only to be stopped by Samson. The whole group then works together to clean the bloodstain away. It has been weeks since anyone has seen Mark. William visits the Grayson household to try and find him, to no avail. He's met by Eve, who had arrived for the same reason. Having nearly recovered completely, Mark is awoken by Cecil, who commends his efforts. Mark wishes the whole thing was a dream, a sentiment Cecil openly shares. Cecil informs Mark that he's recovered well and will be released the next day. In all this, Cecil guides Mark into a seemingly white room. When pressed, Cecil reveals it to be a secret laboratory that projects light in a wavelength normal civilian eye cannot see. The laboratory contains various weapon tests, a Martian head being dissected, and Immortal being reconstructed, though Mark can only see all of this momentarily. Cecil returns Mark and Debbie to their home and promises to be available if they need anything. Once inside, Debbie excused herself to her room, stating she was tired. He goes to leave only to be greeted by Amber and, shortly after that, by Eve and William. The three agree to go out to eat. Debbie visits Art, and they share some scotch as they reminisce and express their disbelief at Nolan's betrayal. Mark's friends are enthusiastic about his return, but their prying about the fight with Nolan causes him increasing discomfort. After he asks them to stop, Cecil suddenly contacts him, who informs him that an entity is traveling towards Earth. Mark suits up and confronts the potential threat, while Eve reveals herself to be Adam Eve. Mark exits the atmosphere, preparing for the worst, only to be met by Alan. Alan frantically informs Mark that a Viltrumite is living on Earth, something Mark was more than aware of. Mark invites a confused Alan to sit and chat as they did upon first meeting. The two discuss their plans for the future. Hopefully, everything will be all right.